Hello and welcome to another episode of Pittsburgh Sports Memories podcast. I'm your host, Steve Wirt, and as usual, I'm joined by.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tim Hannon.
And on today's episode, we're going to do favorite games. These are games that just you probably a lot of people don't remember them, and there's a few favorite moments, maybe just not a game too, but just stuff that happened in sports that I really remember, and I'm sure Tim will remember too, and hopefully everybody else out there remembers at least some of these. But they're just hold a special place in my heart. They might not have won a championship, and there might not even be really an iconic moment attached to them, but just stuff that I just like as I get older, just you cherish stuff more, I guess.
The name of the podcast is Pittsburgh Sports Memories. So these are some good
Yes.
memories.
Yes, that it is. That it is. And they're all good ones on this one, so we don't have any more Sid slid. We won't have to cry through this one, I guess. Complain about, John McSherry not being there. So to start off, it was and this is a definitely a Tim and Steve shared memory, be the last game at Pitt Stadium, and spoiler alert, Pitt would win 37-27. A little background on this: Pitt had played at Pitt Stadium since 1925, and in 1999, and it was all the rage to build yourself a new stadium. So Pitt didn't want a field left out, so they decided to build a new basketball arena. And to do that, they moved the football team to Heinz Field, and they shared their facilities with the Steelers, which they still do. And so the last game was set to be at Pitt Stadium versus Notre Dame on November 13th, 1999. Uh, Pitt had, let's see, 4 wins heading into this game. I know, and it was late in the season too. So Pitt needed to win, I think, this game and the game the following week against West Virginia to qualify for a bowl. Pitt that year had lost to some ranked teams like Boston College, Virginia Tech, who I think Michael Vick was on that team. They had lost to Miami, who was pretty good, and Syracuse. I remember the Syracuse game. I actually attended that game earlier in the season, and the one thing I remember besides I think Kevin Barlow threw a touchdown, which was weird because he was running back, but Syracuse actually botched a snap on a field goal attempt, and then I guess the holder was the backup quarterback, so he just picked up the ball and ran around for seemed like forever, and no, it wasn't Troy Nunes, and he just chucked the ball in the end zone, and instead of Syracuse just being held to a field goal, they actually scored a touchdown. It was probably the most ridiculously lucky moment I've ever seen in sports. It was just what other team but Syracuse, especially at that time. Anytime Pitt played Syracuse, it just seemed like something crazy like that was very fortunate for them would happen. So fun times. Notre Dame was having a down year. They had 5 wins. They had lost to a lot of ranked teams like Michigan and Purdue. The week before, they played Tennessee, who was ranked fourth, and Tennessee totally pounded them. Tennessee was quarterbacked by future by T. Martin, who famously the Steelers picked over Tom Brady. So I guess T. Martin has that going for him. Both Pitt and Notre Dame were mediocre that year, so it really wasn't there really wasn't a ton of stuff on the line. But Pitt did have some players that would go on to have fairly successful NFL careers. Like I said, Kevin Barlow played for years with the 49ers. Nick Goings, he played for Carolina for a while and had a pretty successful career for Nick Goings. Antonio Bryant was good. Did he play? He played for Cleveland and I think a couple other teams.
Dallas.
Dallas, yeah, he would. but he had a solid NFL career too. Unfortunately, they had John Turman and David Priestley throwing them the ball, so that was kind of a problem for Antonio Bryant there. Although Tony Bryant still made the best of it, even with those guys. And they even say during the broadcast of this game that Pitt had the top passing offense that year in the Big East. So you figure, like with Michael Vick and such, that wasn't like a small accomplishment. Notre Dame had quarterback Jarius Jackson, who was pretty mediocre. He wasn't a bad college quarterback, but he wasn't like great or anything. But he was decent. And they had a wide receiver named Bobby Brown, who I remember every time he caught a pass, everybody would laugh because it was like, it's his prerogative to catch a pass, I guess. Yeah. Yeah.
There's going to be a whole generation of people that will not get that joke.
Yeah. Well,
but I think it's hilarious.
Well, I mean, they might just remember him as the guy who was married to Whitney Houston. I don't know. It was a back and forth game. Like both teams kind of made plays. And I remember Antonio Bryant's definitely, he scored the first points of the game, and he made a really nice catch. I also remember Ramon Walker causing a fumble by the Notre Dame running back. Bryant and that kind of turned the game around. Like he had another one where he had an interception too. Like Ramon Walker had a really good game that day, and Antonio Bryant had a great game too. Pitt had another wide receiver named Lateef Grimm, who had like a solid Pitt career, but like he just wasn't Antonio Bryant. He didn't really do much in the NFL, but he was pretty good for Pitt. But he might have been more of a product of that system, like of Walt Harris's system. So I remember, I think it was Bryant made a one-handed catch on a flea flicker play. And I also remember after he scored like one touchdown, Bryant like ran in front of, they had like, I think like 300 former players and like legends like from Pitt. And like he just ran in front of all those guys and like was like just, everybody was just going nuts after he scored that touchdown. I think that gave Pitt the lead. John Turman played most of the game at quarterback. He had 231 yards passing. And then the big play of the game was Kevin Barlow. He scored 2 touchdowns, and the late one, he scored a late touchdown to seal the game and the win. And then one thing I remember too was I screamed at like a Notre Dame player. They were like on the desperation drive. They had like one last desperation drive, which they would have to score and then recover an onside kick, which against Pitt isn't totally out of the question. But I just remember one of the Notre Dame players got injured and I thought he was faking. But then when I've watched that game, like going back, like that guy really was hurt. So, I mean, I guess I was just being a fan at that point. That was Pitt's first victory over Notre Dame since 1987, believe it or not. I mean, that was 13 years, 12 years. Wow. Fans rushed the field and tore down the goalpost. They also ripped up like the turf. I remember some of the fans tried to like steal like one of the benches. They had like the old fashioned metal benches that the players would sit on. And like all they did was like they had like all the security just stand at like the exits. It was like, okay, run around and tear stuff up. You're not going to be able to like, if it's like something really big, you won't be able to get it out of the stadium. So it was just like fans just being fans. And they brought in like the county police on horses, and like that kind of ended everything quickly. Like nobody messes with the mounted county police. So I guess that's why they have them. So why it was special. Well, I remember me and you, we both did attend this game, Tim.
Mm-hmm.
Who else went with us? Do you remember?
It was my brother and our producer, Dave.
So Dave was there. I thought Dave went to that game too. Yeah.
And he brought his camera. Back then you didn't have like the digital cameras. I mean, maybe you did, but they weren't very good. And he brought like his actual like good camera. And I still have pictures he took from that game. Just got some really good pictures, especially of that kind of that melee that you described with the police horses and everything.
Yeah, it was just fun. It was just a fun game, and like I Pitt Stadium, like a lot of games, there wasn't the greatest of atmospheres because Pitt was so bad. But this game just had an incredible atmosphere. It's probably one of the like biggest games I've ever gone to as far as Pitt, and just like everybody being psyched up. And then the Notre Dame fans were definitely there. And then of course there's your faction of Pitt fans that are also Notre Dame fans, which just makes everything really weird. Because like you always have like those Pitt fans that's like, I hope Pitt goes 11-1 every year because they're really like Notre Dame fans. I guess it's like a Catholic thing. I don't know. Whatever, whatever. Like I've been going to Pitt Stadium since I was a kid. It was probably still my favorite place to watch a football game. I had watched a lot of bad football there. One of these other podcasts we'll have to do like on like stadiums that aren't there that we've attended anymore, and I'd go on for like a half an hour just about Pitt Stadium, but I'll save that for another podcast. I've watched a lot of bad football there. The 28-0 BC game in the rain was pretty horrible. 54-14 at home to Ohio State, which it really felt like a game like in Columbus. Like there were so many Ohio State fans game. That stupid botch snap that I talked about against Syracuse that year. And of course, that horrible loss to WVU in like 92 or 93. So, and I'd really like kind of fallen out of like really following Pitt football by that point. I kind of given up on them, I think. I just had better things going on in my life than to watch like really disappointing football. And this game kind of brought me back. Like it got, kind of like the Michael Corleone. Just when I thought I was out, they get me back in. So, but I mean, you were there, Tim. What was it like for you?
Yeah, so totally agree with what you said there. After watching, I too sat through many horrible losses in that stadium. So it was fun to be there for the last game, and it was really fun to close it out with a win. And yeah, Notre Dame wasn't like powerhouse Notre Dame that year, but they were still Notre Dame, and it was still a big win to beat them in the final game of the season, in the final game at that stadium. The two things I remember about the end, one was like they definitely anticipated everybody rushing the field because they picked up everything little. They picked up with like 3 minutes left, like all the cones, like the end zone pylons, like they literally picked all those up even while the game was still going on, just because they knew people were going to be rushing the field. And then I also remember the PA announcer really trying to get, because everybody rushed the field with about 8 seconds left. I mean, Pitt had taken over on
the
downs.
The game never officially ended. They should have taken one more knee, but they just gave up with 8 seconds left.
They just said, you know what, it's over. We don't need to run one last play to take a knee. But then the PA announcer still kept trying to get everybody off the field, because that win made Pitt something like 5-5, and they still had one game left. It was the game at Morgantown, and if they would have won that, they would have been bowl eligible. And so the PA announcer is very calmly like, fans, please get off the field because we might still need to practice for a bowl game on this field.
I remember.
And then finally, after like the 8th time, he's like, get off the field. He's like yelling over the PA system because nobody, I mean, it was pointless at that point. I mean, everybody just wanted to tear down the field goal posts and have fun and try to carry off their benches unsuccessfully. And, I don't think it wasn't like a full blown riot. I don't think anybody got hurt that I can remember. Hopefully.
No, it wasn't.
So it wasn't just like a fun way to close
malicious.
Up. Yeah. No.
Yeah, it wasn't like a malicious crowd. They were just like, it's over. Let's get some souvenirs. Yeah. And the most part, and I forgot to put this in my notes, the most Pitt part of the story, like you said, one bowl in West Virginia wasn't that great either that year. And do you remember the score of that game?
It wasn't close.
It wasn't 55. Yeah, it was 55-21.
Yeah.
They lost.
Yeah. So yeah, they did not go to a bowl game that year, but that was fun. Honestly, again, the highlight of that year was definitely the end of the stadium, and that's the thing. I mean, if they could have beaten West Virginia and won the 3M Scotch tape bowl or whatever, but it wouldn't have mattered. that win was the biggest thing.
Maybe the tire. I'm not sure if the Tire Bowl was around back then, but hopefully it was, because I heard Walt Harris needed a free set of snow tires. Yeah. But yeah, that was a really fun game, and it's one of those things I'll always remember. And I actually have a picture of it. I don't have any place to hang it in my house. It just kind of, I can see it from where I'm sitting. It just kind of sits there. It's like has a picture of Pitt last game at Pitt Stadium. It's like I always try and look for myself because it's like a blimp shot. It's like, oh, I know I'm sitting kind of over here.
You're in there somewhere.
But I think Bettis. Wasn't Bettis? I think Bettis was on
he
the
was. He got
for
booed.
That game,
I remember he waved to the crowd and everybody booed him. Well, because he was on the Notre Dame sideline because he was a Notre Dame alum.
Yeah. What? It's like the first time he ever got booed in Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
But that was a good time. That was a really fun game. Here's a game that nobody probably remembers besides myself. Rutgers, it was Pitt versus Rutgers in 1986. It took me a while to even find a score of this game, but I know it was this year because I was in third grade and that was 1986. And so Pitt had 4 wins heading into this game. They had lost the number 1 Miami, I think the week before, 37-10. So they had that going for them. Their head coach was Mike Gottfried. The defensive coordinator was John Fox, who would later go on to coach Carolina and Chicago. John Kajemi was the quarterback, and Bill Osborne, who I knew more for the color coordinator for the radio broadcast, was on this team. Craig Hayward, Ironhead, Cam Hayward's father, was on this team. So it really was kind of a forgettable year. Pitt, the result was Pitt won against a really crappy Rutgers team. I think both teams ended up being 5-5, or Pitt was 5-1 actually, and they'd really sunk completely into mediocrity. The only thing I remember was a long pass being completed, and I don't remember much else except for like what really stuck out this game was it was my first college football game, and I went with my father and my grandfather, and I just remember I went and I had nachos, and it was just like all these crazy Pitt fans were there, and for some reason, like that always happens at Pitt game. Like I don't understand. Like I still understand the mentality. I guess I mean there's a lot to do in Pittsburgh. Why would a Penn State fan attend a Pitt game when it's not Penn State? I don't quite understand. And number 2, why would you wear like your Penn State gear to a Pitt game when like Penn State isn't even involved? Like, well, I guess, for a non-rival team, huh? I don't know of like people from Ohio. Like you never see like Ohio State fans or like Miami fans like at Pitt games, or like pick another random school that Pitt plays every once in a while. So it's just, for not being a rivalry, their fans sure, didn't think so. But I remember there were Penn State fans there and like the Pitt fans cussing at them and throwing stuff at them. It was quite a classy environment. I learned a lot of new words that day, and like people were like really like drinking, like, because back then like they didn't serve alcohol at the games, but you could like back in the 80s, like I don't even remember like getting patted down or anything. You just gave the person your ticket and walked in pretty much.
Oh yeah.
So
at the Steeler games back then, I remember being a kid going to the Steeler games, and that's the first time I learned what a flask was. I remember asking my dad, what's that thing that they're all passing around and drinking out of? And my dad's like, oh, it's, juice.
Yeah, and you could bring your own food. Like I remember bringing your own food in and sandwiches and stuff. I mean, it was a whole different world back then. Like we grew up, like I don't think like, I guess 40, I'm 44. I mean, I didn't think it was that old, but like you think of the world we grew up in back then, just like stuff like that. Like you could never do that today. Like you're lucky if you could bring a bottle of water into PNC Park. Like you couldn't bring a bottle of water into Heinz Field. They would never let you. You're lucky you can bring like your cell phone and your wallet in anymore. Well, they wouldn't let you leave your wallet because they want you to spend money. But you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, everything goes through a metal detector. I mean, it's it's just a really post 9/11. I mean, I'd say post 9/11, then also just the realization that like you're losing money if you let people bring their own food in, right? So
yeah, that's more the bigger reason. Yeah, and so the big reason that one is special is because, like I said, I was with my father, my grandfather, and like it was like, you know, 3 generations together just enjoying a game, and it made it really fun because my grandfather was a Penn State fan. Now he didn't wear his Penn State gear, so at least he was smart enough to do that. But my grandfather lived in Harrisburg most of the time, and so he was just out to visit us, and we decided to go to a college because my grandfather was a huge college football fan, like my dad and I are. And so it always made it fun when Pitt would play Penn State, although this wasn't that. And I remember my grandfather wanted to go to a Penn State game. My dad was like, no, he wouldn't go, which I think was wise. Like, because this is just like they're playing Rutgers and they were fighting the Penn State fans. I couldn't imagine playing Penn State, you know, what well I only know that from like later on, and people aren't even that rowdy anymore. At least I don't know, maybe they are, I don't know, I don't see it as much lately. But that was just like, I'm sure everybody has that, like moments like that with your father or your, you know, your mother or whatever family member got you into sports. So that's just always a special one, and it's really just such a nondescript game, you know. This is more of a moment. I don't know when the Pirates decided to do this in all their wisdom, but I don't know what game it was, but it was before the game. The Pirates had a home run hitting contest. So this had to be like early 80s. I was like in second grade, maybe. So you're talking 81, 82. So the Pirates at that time actually had like a talented roster of people that could hit home runs, namely Jason Thompson, Bill Madlock, Mike Easler, and to wrap it all up, Pops Willie Stargell. So you had like 4 guys there that could absolutely crush the ball. And so the Pirates decided, let's have a home run hitting contest before the game. And I remember this. Like they literally like Three River Stadium had the Allegheny Club, and they were like club level seats. And remember they had glass on the front of them, and like I guess nobody had the bright idea to make them like baseball proof or shatter proof. Like they broke the windows in the Allegheny Club.
oh,
So,
wow.
and the best part, I mean, Mike Easler could rip, man. And I said, and Stargell could hit some home runs that were in the upper deck of Three River Stadium. So the best the best part of this is, and this is really where this is all leading to, is this story. So my family, if you remember, I remember, some people probably too young to remember Three River Stadium, there were these red seats out in right field. So there was the home run fence, and then probably like, what would you say, like 30, 40 feet, and then the red seats, right?
Yeah.
So, well, actually, they were probably your football seats. They might have been your old, because you sat in the red seats for football, but you might have been on left field, though, not right
We
field.
we would have been in left field and in foul territory a
Okay.
little bit.
Yeah. So we were in right field in fair territory, but same level of seats and underneath the roof. So I think it was Mike Easler absolutely crushes a ball, and I can still remember it. Like it was coming towards us, and so we're in the red seats, like not in the front row. We're probably like 15 rows back of the red seats underneath the roof, and he hits a line drive that is coming over like a sea of hands of fans. And I was young. I can still see it in my head coming over these hands, and apparently it was headed for my mother's face. So my dad reacted and put out his hand, and it hit off my dad's hand. And so it was like my dad was all the way inside, then my mom, then me, then my sister was on the end of the row. So it hits off. It's like a screaming line drive, though. Even though it was like probably went 400 feet, they didn't have, you know, the advanced stats for launch angle and, you know, exit velocity, but I'm sure it was going over 100 miles per hour when it came off the bat. So it hits off my dad's hand, and the beer vendor who was coming down the aisle at the same time, it hits the beer vendor, who promptly dumps a whole, like, what would you call it, case or whatever, tray of beer on my sister, who is like 12
Oh
years
no.
old at the time, like all over her. And for insult to injury, keeps the home run ball. it was the 80s. You get doused in beer and don't get a home run ball out of it. That's how we built character back when I was a kid. So the punchline to this whole story is my sister has never been to a baseball game after this incident, which can you blame her? She walked around and this is before the game. So she literally walked around smelling like beer. People are thinking she's been drinking the whole game. She just literally got doused with, yeah, and didn't even get the home run ball out of it. It's
that's really interesting that they decided to have a home run contest before the game.
Yeah, you would think because they always, it was the 80s too, and you figure players were probably cool with it. Nowadays, be it'll mess up.
I was going to say, that's a big deal now. There's players that won't even participate in the All-Star game version because they're afraid of it messing up their swing. And yeah, you're right, just a different era.
Yeah, and they probably just didn't even have batting practice. They probably shortened the batting practice for the Pirates. They're like, hey, you guys don't have to take batting practice. Just come out here and hit some dinger. It's literally that Simpsons. Who wants to see me hit some dingers? Yay! And they hit some dingers. Some dingers were hit. But yeah, I can't imagine if the Pirates tried to do that today. It'd be like, yeah, we're gonna move the fences. But that was the 80s. That's like I said, a lot of this stuff, you just think back of it, it's I grew up in such a different time. I can't believe I'm this old and saying this. It's just the world I grew up in is not the world that exists now. And that's just, I guess it's just times change and people's attitudes change and such. So, well, moving on, the next is a much more recent memory. And we've gone over this in a whole podcast we did, is Super Bowl 40. It's still one of my favorite games of all time. The Steelers hadn't won a championship since the 1970s. They had been close a lot in the 90s and 2000s. The result of the game was 21-10. The Steelers won. They pulled off an all-time run through the playoffs. They knocked off Cincy. They beat Indianapolis and Denver in Denver. And they don't play their best game in the Super Bowl, but they play well enough to win. The big plays were definitely Willie Parker's 75-yard run, Ike Taylor with that huge interception in the second half, and of course the iconic play from that Super Bowl was Antoine Randall's trick pass play to Hines Ward. So, I was just such a great, moment. I remember cheering and going crazy. And the why it's special was because, like we said in the other podcast, my generation hadn't seen a championship for the Steelers. So this was kind of our championship. It was almost our first one with the Steelers. And we'd been at least me, I'd been a Steelers fan since 91. And I know that's not as long as maybe some of the Cubs or, other people that have gone 30 or 40 years. But, it'd been 10 or 15 years. It'd been a while. And we'd been so close so many times and been short, So it's just, that just made it special. And also getting to watch the game with my parents and my wife and my kids, it was so much fun. And just, going over their house, and we had a Super Bowl party, and just experiencing it with all my family was fun. And of course, I remember after the game, I actually called Tim and we actually talked about the game, 15, 20 minutes, and that was just another great thing experiencing with Tim, we got to share that because, we're both you've been Steeler fan since you were a little kid, and you've been going to the games since your dad, had started taking you. So I'm sure it's just as special. That game has to be just as special. I'm sure if it doesn't mean more to you than even me, just.
Yeah, for sure. That's, gotta be, I don't know if that'll ever clear off of the top 3, sports memories, just because of, like you said, how long we all had to wait. And, and then also just, and I won't go into this in detail because we did talk about it in the episode we did, but how, you and I just grew up with the shadow of the 70s, oh, the Steel Curtain and Mean Joe Green and Terry Bradshaw. And that's all anyone talked about ever. And then meanwhile, we missed all that just barely. We were born in the 70s, but we just barely missed all that. And that's all you heard about. And that's all they talked about. Every broadcast of a Steeler game, they'd show an old clip. And it was this was one for our generation, and I think that's what made it so special.
For sure. And I don't care how many people bash this Super Bowl. We won it fair and square. It's my win. The 43 was just like the icing on the cake for me. Because after that, I was like, I can't believe we finally won one. So I could imagine that's the way like Red Sox and Cubs fans felt, you know. So on to hockey. I have it kind of listed as the Penguins win the cup in 91. But more, I remember that 8-0 win over Minnesota in Game 6. So the background kind of leading up to that game was the Pens had sucked. I mean, they'd been founded in 67, and they hadn't even made it. Had they made it out of the second round of any of the playoffs ever, Tim?
No,
I don't think
they had
so,
not.
right? Because they lost to St. Louis a couple times, right? In the Island, or was the Islanders in the first round, or that might have been the second?
They had definitely never made it to a conference final before that year, for sure.
Yeah, and that's funny because Nassau Coliseum, like Tampa Bay, just like a week ago in 2021, won a Game 7 in that, and that was the same arena the Penguins lost in?
Yes,
way back when. Yeah, so they're one of the teams that lost a Game 7, or they might, Game 7, and against the Islanders. So because the Islanders have only lost 5 times in elimination games, and and it's one is to the Penguins on the Brooks Orpik shot. Remember in like the 2000s in overtime, and then that one against Tampa. It's only like the Islanders hardly ever lose in elimination games at home, but enough Islanders hockey there. They're out of the playoffs. So, but the Penguins did not. It's just part of the Penguins just sucking, losing, blowing a 3-0 lead, all not having a very big fan base. So in '84, obviously Mario comes to town, and even after that, they didn't even make the playoffs until '89. In '89, they got eliminated in the first or second round every year. So in '91, they finally break through. And a part of it was because in the middle of that season, they made a big trade. They traded for Larry Murphy, and they got Ron Francis, Al Samuelson, and Grant Jennings. They traded John Cullen, I think, for those 3 guys. John Cullen and I think Zarley Zalapsky or somebody like that. So I don't know, whatever. John Cullen and Zarley Zalapsky are doing other things now, but definitely they're not the Hall of Famers that Larry Murphy or Ron Francis is. But and it's obvious that Grant Jennings was the real guy that Craig Patrick was after that whole time, But they finished I think third in the Patrick division and 4th in the conference. And of course, what else happened in those playoffs? They had the big save by backup goalie Frank Pietrangelo in that game against the Devils, and then when they got to the final, they have this unbelievable goal by Mario, and it's become like, now this is like more of your iconic moment. And that was in Game 2 where Mario gets the puck and basically skates through the whole Minnesota's defense, and Minnesota had been red hot going up to that game, if I remember correctly, to that series. So the results in Game 6, the Penguins need to eliminate them, and they just literally just spanked Minnesota. I knew the game was over when Jim Pack scored a goal. You knew that they weren't coming back. Why was it special? This was the first time I've ever experienced anybody winning a championship in Pittsburgh. Like, I was way too young for the Steelers and Pirates. So, I mean, I guess it had only been 11 years since the Steelers had won Super Bowl 10. So, but, they just, and the Penguins too, like, we were all kind of new to hockey, like they're my best Canadian, new to hockey, So we really didn't, I think as like hockey fans, we really didn't know like what was going on. At least I didn't too. I was like I was in junior high. So, but I even like got like a Wales Conference champion tank top. It was like probably the most 90s thing ever. And also the scene at the airport when the Penguins came back was crazy. Like 20,000 people showed up at the airport to like greet them. Imagine like another, like, let's put this as a category of things you could not do today, you know, show up at the airport and wait for the team to come back. So, what else do you remember from this, Tim?
Well, I think like you said, it was the first time. The 80s were a long decade for Pittsburgh sports. Like nobody was good. And it was a little different. We just talked about how Super Bowl 40, you said how the Steelers were close so many times in the 90s and early 2000, but the 80s, no one was close to anything that decade. Like literally nobody won anything. Nobody made a deep playoff run. It was just all bad sports every year. And then for us to have a championship there at the beginning of the 90s, and like for people like us who were too young for the 70s, that was really cool. And like you said, the whole city just lit up. And like you said, the airport thing, yeah, you couldn't do that today, but boy, that was quite a scene. If you go back and watch that on YouTube, it's quite a scene. All those people at the airport in the middle of the night. How awesome.
Yeah, and I remember the second when they won the next year against Chicago, like Bob Airy was like on TV. Like if you watch some of the post game, he's like, "Yeah, we'll see you at the airport." And like I think it's Paul Staggerwalt's interview. He's like, "No, don't go to the airport." I guess the next year the county was like, "No, please don't go to the airport. We don't have one." Because like you said, it's like they barely could make it through the hallways at like, and this was like before the new terminal. Right. So I remember like the old terminal at the airport. Boy, we're getting old, Tim. Like this is like really Yinzer. We're getting like 7 levels deep in Yinzer territory here. But do you remember the old terminal? You're a little bit younger than me.
Vaguely. I mean,
it was like almost just a building
Yeah.
that you got like the new terminal has like wings and stuff. It was almost just like a maze of like building, you know. It didn't have like official like, you know, feeling like you're in an airport. Like every airport's kind of the same now. Like you have like those little like, what would you call it? Like hallways you go down or whatever they call that, wings. Like it wasn't built like that, the old terminal, or like where you would take a tram from one side. Like the old terminal wasn't like that. So it was really crowded and stuff, but get to learn a little bit about the old airport too in our podcast. Switching back to the Steelers. Now this, I mean, some people, probably a lot of people remember this game, but this is still one of my favorite outside of the Super Bowl wins. This is just, I just love this game. I love this win, and just it's become more and more meaningful as the years go on, especially as certain people that are involved in it have had more success than I probably would have been comfortable with them. So it was Steelers Cleveland in the divisional round in 1994. The background was the Steelers had returned to being good again. Like Tim said, the 80s, they stunk. So in 92, they had home field and lost to Buffalo in the first round. And then the next year, they lost to Kansas City and Joe Montana, if I remember correctly, in the wild card. But they had gone 9-7. But they really had a good year that year. They were 12-4. Barry Foster had a great season. And they had already beaten the Browns twice that season. And the Browns had some guy coaching them, Belichick something or other. Yes, Bill Belichick.
I don't even remember.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, whatever happened to him, I don't know.
He wore a hoodie
just
or something.
Faded away.
Like, yeah, he had like a really 90s starter hoodie on, but no, Bill Belichick was the coach of the Browns back then, and he famously cut Bernie Kosar, which ticked everybody off in Cleveland. But, you know, more famously, Art Modell kind of screwed that whole thing up because, boy, that's kind of scary, Tim. Like, if Art Modell, like, just think of this. We didn't do this in alternate timelines because it doesn't involve Pittsburgh, but how about an alternate Cleveland Browns timeline where Cleveland pays for his new stadium. Art Modell stays in Cleveland, keeps that coaching staff that had Nick Saban, the guy who coached with the Lions for a couple of years, and Bill Belichick. And they had a couple executives that were pretty good. And they draft like Tom Brady in 99 or stick with a quarterback. You could be looking at like your 6-time Super Bowl champion Cleveland Browns. very easily.
You could make the case actually because Ozzie Newsome was in their front office and he's the one
that's
that built
right.
that
That's
2000.
Right.
Yeah. So he built that 2000
team,
Ravens defense. You could actually make the argument that amazing like all-time Ravens defense might have had Tom Brady at quarterback if they would have kept Belichick. Like that literally was a real possibility.
With Belichick coordinating with Ray Lewis, at linebacker and like all those other Ed Reed and all those other great talent they had. I don't even want to think of, like Belichick was really good with like some mediocre talent in New England. I can't imagine what he would have done with that in Cleveland. But oh well, Art Modell moved the team, so boo-hoo on them. I mean, you really can't be that mad at Baltimore. I mean, they've won 2 Super Bowls, so geez, really. The Browns, the Steelers had beaten the Browns actually twice that season, and they would have to. The Browns won their wild card game, setting up a third match against the Steelers. And actually, do you remember who the Browns won their wild card game against the week before?
That would be the New England Patriots.
And Drew Bledsoe, oddly enough, yes. And I guess that was Parcells. Yeah, Parcells. So that would have been the mentor versus the teacher kind of matchup,
yes.
Huh?
Yep.
Wow. So we're going 7 level deep on the NFL now, but this, like I said, the Steelers hadn't won a playoff game since 1989, and I just remember all the hype. I mean, this game was so hyped that whole week, and it was like, no, you can't beat a team 3 times in one season, and and the Steelers don't have a chance, and Cleveland's gonna come in here, and blah blah blah. Well, guess what happened? The Steelers blew the doors off of the Cleveland Browns. And I mean, it's probably unfair. Like, people always think Vinny Testaverde sucks. I don't think Vinny Testaverde was bad as people think he was. He just did bad against the Steelers. And even that game, if you go watch that game, like, he was the victim of their one wide receiver, Derek Alexander. He dropped like at least 3 passes where he was wide open. They beat the blitz. Like, if they complete those passes, it's probably at least a closer game. I'm not saying Cleveland would have won, but I think Cleveland at least would have been in the game. Because what happens is the Steelers drive down and they get a field goal early, and then they get an Eric Green touchdown. And it's like 10-3. Then John L. Williams scores like a 24-yard touchdown, rushing touchdown, which was unbelievable because John L. Williams was like really old by that point and kind of slow. And like, it just caught, Bill Belichick, the greatest defensive mind of our time off guard, I guess. But him and Nick Saban couldn't figure it out. So, but John L. Williams is like, he was more of a pass catcher. And like I said, he was kind of a veteran guy. Yancey Thigpen had a touchdown, and it was 24. I think it had 24 points before the half. So the Steelers really were up 24-3, and the game was kind of over. See, at that point, you couldn't just score like 21 points at the drop of a hat. You actually had to kind of earn it. They played a lot more defense back in the 90s. The Steelers added a safety in the second half, but then Testaverde just stunk it up in the second half, and probably just because the game was so far out of hand and he had to pass every time. And another great fun fact was the Browns wouldn't win a playoff game for another 20 years. I wonder who that was against.
We're not going to make that one's not going to make your list, I'm guessing.
No.
The favorite memories.
Yeah, maybe not so favorite memories. I just remember why it was special. This was my first big rivalry game, and as a fan, and it was the first time the team that I was like on the other side of the rivalry actually won. Like, all those years, like Pitt Notre Dame, Pitt Penn State, it was like Pitt just would get crushed. Or like, and like you said, the Steelers really hadn't won a big game in a long time. And boy, I don't know, Tim, if I could have lived myself if we had lost a playoff game to Cleveland. I don't know how I would live with myself.
Yeah. Imagine living in that world.
Yeah, I mean, how would you ever live with yourself losing a playoff game? Like, getting blown out in the playoffs by Cleveland. Jeez.
Yeah. Well, and that was really that was honestly I mean, because the Cleveland Pittsburgh rivalry, I don't know that everybody remembers because it hasn't been really the same since. That was huge all through the 70s, all through the 80s. I mean, even when the Steelers were bad in the 80s, they still had that streak going where the Browns could never win at Three River Stadium. It was such a big rivalry, and that was the absolute height of it to play them in a divisional playoff game. And then the next year, they're gone. And then when they came back, it really was another 20 years before there was even relevance again. I mean, honestly, it was probably that game and the Myles Garrett hitting our quarterback over the head with his own helmet. That is probably the gap between when that series was relevant.
The wild card game too, where he had the big comeback.
Okay, I forgot about that. The Tommy Maddox comeback, but that was almost like a blip in the radar because
it was a one-off because they were good that one year and then they weren't really good again till this last play till the Myles Garrett thing. Yeah.
Right.
And that's what, going forward with the Steelers, that's what kind of scares me is like, that's a cathartic win for Cleveland. That coming here and beating us like they did. Like, I don't know, like sometimes a team wins a game like that and it kind of flips the script or flips the mojo to their favor where maybe they don't win every game, but then they dominate the series for a while. So
maybe,
well, I mean, only time will tell.
They're Cleveland. They are Cleveland, so I'm sure they'll find a way to Cleveland it up somehow. But time will tell, like you said.
Time will tell. Going back to another like totally nondescript Pitt game. This is Boston College versus Pitt, and this was in 2002. The background of this game was Pitt was 6-2 and 3-0 in the Big East. Boston College was 4-3 and 0-3 in the Big East, and probably the most notable thing about the players on this team was it was the battle of future backup Steeler quarterbacks, one being Rod Rutherford and the other Brian St. Pierre, both of which I think ended up getting Super Bowl rings with the Steelers. So go figure. We're going to see two Super Bowl winning quarterbacks in this game. Can't say that in the SEC, can ya? But that was such as Big East football in 2002. So it was a low-scoring game. It was kind of a more defensive game. Pitt took a lead into the half, 13-6 on a Rod Rutherford passing touchdown. Also, Larry Fitzgerald played in this game, so I shouldn't sell Larry Fitzgerald short. He was very good. So Brian St. Pierre threw a touchdown in the fourth quarter to give BC the lead, 16-13. And I do remember, like, it was kind of midway through the fourth quarter, and Pitt kind of like had a drive that stalled out. I can't remember. I think they went for it on fourth down. I haven't punting, but I'm pretty sure they went for it. And it was either like on their side of the 50 or like around the 50, maybe like the 40. And Pitt gives the ball back to them. And Boston College has like maybe 3 minutes left. But Pitt still had all three of its timeouts left, which under Walt Harris was kind of rare because, or maybe it was Todd Graham too. Like they love to use up their timeouts in the first half. So, but nevertheless, it really came in. Like I remember all the fans like started to leave. Like when that fourth down happened, I was like, this is crazy. I wouldn't leave because there's still like 3 minutes left and Pitt has all its timeouts. So Pitt's defense comes through, and Pitt's defense didn't play that bad of a game, and they held Boston College, and Boston College punts, and Pitt gets the ball back with like 2 minutes left, and Rod Rutherford drives them down the field and gets them close enough to where David Abdul, who was the kicker at the time, he hits a 30-yard field goal with like seconds left to send it into overtime. I remember like not being so nervous before, like, because I was like such a Pitt fan and just like, how are they going to screw this up, and just like watching through like my half closed fingers, and then they nail it. Because like I wasn't we didn't have season tickets that year. We just went to a couple different games, and I was actually sitting in the visitors section. So we were on the open. It was into the, I mean, and that was Heinz Field in 2002 in the open end. Like a 30-yard field goal in college in the open end of that stadium at that time was definitely a risky proposition. So in the overtime, Pitt's offense literally does not gain 1 yard. And in college, you start at the 25. So they literally started at the 25, went 3 and out, and like kicked the ball. Like they had to kick their field goal from the 25. But David Abdul, it wasn't pretty, but it went through, and it was 42 yards, and he got it through, and that's all that matters. It like I remember it didn't clear, like it wasn't like that was wide left or right. It just barely made it over the crossbar, and it was like, okay, still counts for 3. So not to be outdone, the Pitt defense once again kind of comes through again. They're not kind of, they really did, and they hold BC. I think BC actually lost yardage. They were kicking from the 28, if I remember correctly. And Pitt, and when they kicked it, the guy kicked it low for Boston College. I did not waste the time looking up who was the Boston College kicker. It could have been, I don't know, Doug Flutie. I don't know, but maybe not.
Probably not him.
Yeah, probably not in 2002. He was playing for the Bills or something, but it hit off one of the defensive linemen for Pitt's helmet, and it wasn't even close, and Pitt wins. So Pitt wins. It's party in the stands. And what happened after that? Pitt went on to win the Insight Bowl, and there's an amazing highlight of Larry Fitzgerald catching an early touchdown. And BC went on to oblivion and the ACC, which I think it's really the same thing when you go to the ACC. You just enter oblivion, as Pitt is finding out for itself right now. So at least in football. Why is this game special, Steve? Why is a game that like really didn't mean that much in a game like Pitt finished? I think Pitt finished with 9 wins that year. One thing I remember I said all the fans left like with 3 minutes. Well, I don't know if they just stood out in like the Great Hall and watched it on the TV. It was funny because after Abdul hit that kick to send it to overtime, everybody flooded back into the stadium. It was like absolutely hilarious. It was like, where were all you people like a minute ago? You know? So somehow they must have not left through the gates, because at Heinz Field, at least, they don't let you come back after there's no re-entry. So I remember my dad being totally confused by the college overtime rules and format. He's like, now what happens? I was like, so what does Boston College have to do? Yeah, they have to score. If they don't score, I'd explain it. So I tried to break it down. Like if they miss a field goal or they throw an interception, the game's over. It's like, I just say, if you don't score and Pitt scores, you lose. That's the easiest way to explain college overtime. If one team scores and the other doesn't, the game's over. If it's tied, you keep going. We actually sat in the visitor section, that just because, like I said, we were just kind of picking games we wanted to go to. And all the Boston College fans actually were really classy, and they were nice. I remember like after like the field goal, the missed field goal, I hugged my dad, you know, and it was just like one of those father-son bonding moments. So it was just, you know, it was just a lot of fun, and just, you know, it's kind of a nondescript game. I'm sure Tim remembers this game clearly, right? Yeah, in Boston College 2002.
I do remember the game. Yes.
Do you really? Wow, I'm impressed. Like, you're pretty good with stuff, so I figured if anybody remember it besides me, it'd probably be you. Do you remember anything? Even anything? Did you guys have? I don't think you guys had season tickets yet by that point. Season tickets to Pitt.
I think we actually did, but I do not remember if I was there or not. So you got me on that one.
Okay.
But I remember the field goals in overtime, and they actually, there was a game 2 years later where they went to overtime against Boston College at Heinz Field also.
Yeah, but they fumbled on a pass.
Right. That's how that game ended. Yeah.
Yeah, and the Revis, that's another great game. Darrelle Revis makes as a freshman, that was 2004, makes an unbelievable tackle.
Mm-hmm.
And to like save a touchdown.
I actually remember that game more probably than the 0-2 game.
Yeah.
But yeah, sounds like a nice moment there with your dad.
Yeah. So another fine moment we get in. I've gone to a lot more probably Pitt because I had Pitt season tickets for so long. So Pitt was suffering through a 4-win season. This is Pitt Miami in 2017. Uh, they didn't really have a starting quarterback because Nathan Peterman had left the year before. So they brought in a guy named Max Brown. He had been the top recruit way back out of high school. He kind of flamed out at USC. But then he wasn't bad. He was just kind of tall and he had an okay arm, but he got hurt in the Syracuse game. So they tried to bring in Ben DiNucci. And he really, you could just tell like Ben DiNucci just wasn't. I mean, I don't mean to be rude to the guy. He just wasn't a division. I never got the feeling that Ben DiNucci was a Division I starting quarterback. I just from watching what I saw of him. And so eventually, after like kind of going back and forth, they just settled on Kenny Pickett, who's still the quarterback, you believe it or not. Pitt had 3 really bad blowout losses. They had Penn State at home and Oklahoma State on the infamous free drink game where they're getting blowed out. NC State at home too. I remember going to that game and they lost. That was another Ben DiNucci game. Then late in the season, the offense got somewhat better as I think Pickett settled in, and the defense kind of settled in, or maybe played teams that weren't as good on offense. They actually the week before they played Virginia Tech in Blacksburg, and Pitt always plays Virginia Tech tough, if not beats them. And Pitt got stuffed on a fourth and goal play where they could have won it at the end, but they got stuffed. This was the last game of the season, and it was against Miami in November in Heinz Field. Miami was undefeated going into that game. And Pitt had not beaten Miami since 2014, and that was actually in Miami. And that is the first and the last times Pitt won in Miami since like the Johnson administration. And I'm not Andrew Johnson, but Lyndon Johnson. So I mean, it wasn't it wasn't Reconstruction period. It was at least the Civil Rights period. So we got that going for us. But and also Pitt had not beaten Miami at home since the 1996 game in Pitt Stadium, which that was the year they went to the Liberty Bowl. So the biggest thing that was happening to Pitt was they were the Pitt had going for him was Miami was ranked number 2. So onto the game. What happened in the game here? The Hurricanes, they had a good defense, but its weakness was it relied on the turnover. And sometimes when you do that and you don't get turnovers, it doesn't work out for you. So whenever they would get a turnover, Miami would have this turnover chain, which was like a necklace they would wear. So what happened was onto the game, Pitt actually pulls the upset 24-14. Pitt had an unforced turnover on a high snap that Miami turned into points to take a 7-3 lead. And then Pitt turned the ball over on a fumble, which was really like Miami's defense kind of doing the thing that they had done the whole year. They hit Chris Clark, the tight end, really hard, and he fumbled. The defense, they stood tall even after that turnover and forced Miami to punt. So the defense really stepped up. And Pitt's defensive line dominated the Miami offensive line for the whole game. Pitt was able to get pressure with just 4 guys most of the game, which is pretty impressive. Pitt took a lead on a nice scramble by Kenny Pickett. I remember that. That was in the end zone I was in. He literally like he kind of bounced off, but he ran over a safety. Like the safety from Miami tried to hit him, and he just kind of bounced off him and went into the end zone. So Kenny Pickett, he's always been kind of a tough guy. It's been pretty fun to watch him play. So Pitt goes into the half leading 10-7 when this happens.
They really haven't stopped our offense yet. We've stopped ourselves with drop passes. We've turned it over once, which was that gimme, which I told you before the game. They did earn one on a big hit on Chris Clark. The great thing is our defense stepped up in the sudden change situation, went 3 and out. Our kids are playing hard. We got to finish it. There's 30 minutes to go. There's still a lot of football to be played.
What was your message about finishing it in these final 30 minutes?
Well, it happened in West Virginia where we knocked off number 2. It happened in South Carolina, and it's happening in Pittsburgh today.
Yeah, who doesn't play for that guy? So hopefully, we're hoping that Pat Narduzzi isn't cashing checks writing checks that his team can't cash, right? So we go in the second half, and not a lot of coaches would have said that, right?
Yeah. So. Yeah. Yeah, he had, they had not a great season that year, and I think he just had nothing to lose. That was the end of the season. And man, if they could just get that big win, that would be a great way to end things.
It basically became their de facto bowl game. That's really what it ended up being. And I love how he takes credit for West Virginia too. It's dude, you weren't the coach of that team. But, hey, whatever. I love the passion.
Remember when we beat?
You were there for the Clemson.
Remember when we beat number 2 ranked Army back in 27?
Yeah. But nevertheless, Pitt gets another Dwayne Hendricks sack early in the second half. So Pitt's just oh man, they're just killing them. They're killing Miami on the offensive line. Quadri Allison, it's very important to get your quadries straight on this team because there's 2 of them. And they both play key parts in this game, actually, so it makes it fun. But he scores on the shovel pass late in the third. I think that this play, Sean Watson just found it laying around in Matt Canada's playbook that maybe he forgot to take with him when he went to LSU. I was oh, hey, look, shovel pass play. It worked against Clemson last year. Let's try it again. But in the fourth quarter, Miami decides that they're going to change quarterbacks from Mike Rozier, and they go to, I can't remember the guy's, their backup quarterback's name. But it didn't really matter because, unfortunately, they didn't change their offensive line. So the quarterback really wasn't the problem with their offense that day. And now, and what even is better is Pitt is now starting to blitz. So if you couldn't stop a 4-man rush, what are you going to do when 5 and 6 people are coming? So now, and the backup quarterback gets sacked by Avonte Maddox. So it's really, really pretty total domination at this point. Halfway through the fourth quarter on a 3rd and 9, Kenny Pickett almost makes a freshman mistake. The Miami defender is literally standing right there, and Pickett throws it high, but it wasn't high enough. And it literally, I remember when this play happened, I said, I can't believe this was an interception. And I guess just when it's your day kind of thing. And it goes through, and Quadri Henderson, the receiver, is behind him 10 yards up the field, and he catches the ball for a big third down conversion. And it was just unreal that that should have been an interception. That probably would have totally changed the game because he probably the Miami defender probably scores there. But up 10 points with 3 minutes to go. Pitt has a 4th and 5 at the Miami 22-yard line. Narduzzi, like you said, has nothing to lose, so he makes a gutsy call, and he goes for it. Instead of just kicking a field goal that would have only put them up 13 points. So really, even if you only get the first down, with 3 minutes to go, you could at least run Miami out of timeouts, So, and they call a fake handoff. It's a pretty safe play too. And he fakes the handoff to, I guess, Allison, and he sneaks around the edge. And when he does, Miami's defense, who's kind of it was a great call too, because Miami was an over-aggressive, turnover-based defense. So they chase the running back instead of staying home and playing solid defense. So Kenny Pickett not only gets the first down, he's like wide open and he runs for like 20 yards and they almost catch him at the goal line, but he dives and he hits the pylon and it's like a great highlight. And so now they have a 24-7 lead or no 20. Yeah. So they're up by a couple of touchdowns with only 2 minutes and 40 seconds to go. And of course, Pitt being Pitt, they can't just close this out. They gave up a quick touchdown to Miami with 2:16 left. And then Miami recovers the onside kick, which is only Pitt would give up that. And I still think on that onside kick, I remember seeing it live. I couldn't believe like that the player from Miami had recovered that inbounds because it looked like he was out of bounds. But so now with a 10-point lead and 2 minutes to go, the defense steps up and on 3rd and 3, Avonte Maddox again makes a big play. He strips the ball from Rozier, the starting quarterback who is now back to the game, and the defense recovers and the game's basically over. Not even Pitt could screw that one up. So it was a great game. Avonte Maddox after the game wears a turnover chain with a Panther logo on it. Some fan had made it at home and handed it to him. Pitt goes into the offseason with an amazing 5-7 record and their inexplicable win over the undefeated number 2 ranked team in the country, which I think Miami did not win a game the rest of the year after that. They went to the ACC championship game and lost. So it's still probably the biggest win of Kenny Pickett's college career. That Quick Lane Bowl win in 2019 over Eastern Michigan. It was a comeback, but just not that. Besides losing their undefeated season, this was a meaningless loss. Miami still, went to the championship game and they lost by 35 points to Clemson. And then they lost to Wisconsin in the Orange Bowl. So I guess, after losing to Pitt, it was just all downhill for them. So, Mark Richt, actually, the coach of Miami, retired after the next season. I guess he had enough of underachieving programs after Georgia and Miami. Ben DiNucci transferred to James Madison, a lower FCS school. So, and he actually played in a couple of national championship games for James Madison. He was a good quarterback at that level. And then for some reason, I still don't understand how this happened or why this happened. He, out of all the quarterbacks that have played for Pitt, who were so much better than Ben DiNucci, he started a NFL game for the Dallas Cowboys. I do not know what Max Brown was way better than him, and he didn't even get a sniff at the NFL. So any guesses on why? Like, I only think
he definitely started because Dak Prescott and Andy Dalton both got hurt. So it wasn't like, but still, to your point, he was in the NFL and he almost started the game last year against the Steelers because they played the Steelers in Dallas, remember? And at one point they thought he might.
I wish he would have, because I would have bet the house on the Steelers on that one. There's no way. Ben DiNucci is not,
I remember when that happened. I was like, is that like a different Ben DiNucci? Because that's not a very common name.
Well, I remember him play. I remember I watched one of the FCS championship game, and I saw him play, and he was okay. Like when I saw him play, I was like, he's good at this level, but I didn't think he was so good. I was like, oh man, I can't believe Pitt lost this guy. I was kind of like, he's just not, up to snuff of this level of quarterbacking, which whatever. And why Max Brown, who was way better and way taller and had just as good as arm, if not better than him. I don't know. I think it's just too who's the coach of the Cowboys now? The guy from Greenfield, Mike
McCarthy.
Mike McCarthy. I think he knew DiNucci from when he was in high school or something. So it's just weird how the NFL works. Sometimes it's kind of a lot in life. It's not what you know, it's who you know. So you might, Also, Kenny Pickett. Yes, he's like in his 16th year as Pitt quarterback. No, honestly, in 2021, this is his 6th and final year in 21. I mean, unless he goes for like a PhD, which how much longer does a PhD take to get? And they let him play for another 2 or 3 years. But I think this is it for Kenny Pickett. But that's still his greatest win, unless he pulls off something amazing this upcoming season, which you never know. You never know. Why this game is special? Well, like I said, and I've said a couple times throughout this podcast, is my dad and I have been going to Pitt football games since 1987, and we had season tickets in the 90s for like a season or two, and then we had season tickets at Heinz Field since 2002 until 2019. But 2017, my dad's health his knees got real bad, and his health just couldn't permit him to go to the games anymore. So this was the last game. My dad had kind of told me halfway through the season this was going to be the last season he would go to. So that was the last game that me and my father have attended, and it was a great way. It was just a great, like, a number 2 ranked team, of course, and Pitt sent out my dad a winner, and just one of those games I'm going to have, for as long as I have my memory, but it was just a lot of fun and a great game. And if anything you remember about that besides, Miami getting upset, it wasn't a close game either. It really wasn't. Pitt dominated them the whole game.
That's actually what I was going to say. That's actually what I remember. Is I just kept waiting the whole time for, okay, Miami's going to come back. Maybe Pitt can hold the lead, and then they just like never did. And it just was like not even close. It was weird because there's other games that Narduzzi talked about, West Virginia and Clemson, where they beat the number 2 team. Those were, down to the wire finishes, nail biters, and this was just like, oh yeah, we're winning by 2 scores like the whole game, which was very odd because even 17 team was not that good, and Miami was undefeated.
Yeah, well, I think they were one of those teams that got better as the season went on, especially at quarterback because he was so young. And once he got a little better, and they probably should have beat Virginia Tech. I think they actually ran that shovel pass that went for a touchdown. They ran against Virginia Tech, if I remember correctly, and Virginia Tech was ready for it. So, it is what it is. Miami's always a lot of fun to play. Pitt really doesn't ever beat them, hardly ever. So, moving on and sticking with the Pitt theme. I know this is Pitt heavy, but hey, it's my list and they're my favorite games. So, boo, Pitt versus the University of Central Florida in 2019, and I had mentioned a little bit about this game in our Traditions podcast a couple podcasts ago, but we'll go over this a little bit more in depth. The background of this game was Pitt had played the University of Central Florida the year before and lost 14-45. It was really embarrassing, not just losing to a non-Power 5 team, and this was like they were in this AAC conference, which is really an amalgam of old Big East and Conference USA schools that they kind of, reformed together, Also, like, another embarrassing part was, like, because UCF runs like that up-tempo offense where they try and run a lot of plays like Oregon does, Pitt players were like faking injuries during the games to slow down because it was in Florida and it was like really hot and they're like, oh, my knee, I'm hurt. So it didn't really help. And it was kind of like, what happened against the Oklahoma State the year before. It's probably like one of the more embarrassing losses in Pat Narduzzi's coaching tenure. And what happened to, like, brave Pat Narduzzi, making predictions at halftime and, go for it on 4th and 5 instead of kicking the field goal. Then he does like that stuff like against Penn State, like a year or two later. I don't understand that at all, but I guess that's I don't know. Anyway, well, Pitt's UCF is now coming to return to favor and is coming to Heinz Field in 2019. UCF is ranked 15th and is trying to make a strong case for the college football playoffs. Pitt still has Kenny Pickett, of course, and its defense is improving. Maybe it couldn't be much worse than it was the year before, right? So Pitt's defense starts off strong. They pick off the Central Florida quarterback a couple of times, and they also score on offense a couple of T's, and they block a punt for a TD, and they go up 28-0, and they're actually leading at 21-7 going into the half. But UCF goes on an epic scoring run, including that 7 before the half. They actually score 31 points in a row, which I'm not sure if that's a record or what, but it's kind of like Clerks, 31 points in a row. But and they even have like their own punt return for a TD in the middle of this. This is a pretty crazy game, quite honestly. So while the defense is melting down, the offense is struggling because Kenny Pickett is hurt and he had to come back. So with the ball inside the 10-yard line of Central Florida and Pitt's on offense, backup quarterback Nick Patty comes in and he scrambles around and he throws a TD to make a score 34-28. So Pitt's kind of back in the game. So late in the game, Pitt gets the ball back again, and Kenny Pickett leads Pitt on a drive late in the fourth quarter. He hits some big passes down the field, and the drive stalls at the UCF 4-yard line. So with under a minute left to go, Pitt goes for it on 4th and 3. So it's the big moment. Pitt's got to score here or get a first down to keep the game. It's 4th and 3 from, I think, the UCF, like 6 or 5 or something. I think they could have got a first down and not scored a touchdown. But what they did do was they ran a trick play. And this is Mark Whipple, who's offensive coordinator skill. I would say, like, he doesn't run necessarily like a coherent playbook. It's just kind of a collection of plays that are called. I'm not sure like what's going on sometimes. So they run a play with Shane Matthews, who's a running back. He gets this direct snap, and then he hands the ball to A.G. Davis is the running back. He gets the snap. He hands the ball on a wide receiver, is like coming in motion, Shane Matthews, who throws a pass to Kenny Pickett, who is in the end zone, and it's a touchdown. And it looks exactly like the play from, I guess, was that the Super Bowl that year, the Philly special. So, and I think that it just happened. So Pitt's totally stole play from Philly. So the running back, A.J. Davis, if you watch the replay, they fumble the shotgun snap a little bit. Matthews doesn't throw the greatest pass in the world. It's a little low, but Pickett makes a nice catch, and it's the go-ahead TD. And, of course, Pitt, this being Pitt, they made the all-important extra point, and they go ahead 34-35. And the defense holds this time. Central Florida has a 4th and 22 with under 10 seconds left, and the Pitt defense makes the tackle. Pitt would go on to make an appearance in the Quick Lane Bowl, and they made a comeback to win that game against Eastern Michigan. Central Florida learned a very important lesson. It's not whether you win or lose, it's what lessons you've learned along the way. And the Central Florida learned that, you should not play Pitt when you're a program needing a transformational win, because it really hasn't really worked out well for most of those teams involved. Really, the only team that's ever been able to pull that off is probably Cincinnati in 2009. So that it. West Virginia and Miami and Clemson, and although it really didn't hurt Miami or Clemson that much, but definitely hurt West Virginia and Central Florida a lot. So why was it special? Well, here's the reasons I mentioned in another podcast was I had to rewatch the highlights of this game because I only really remembered the Pitt special play, and there's a good reason for that. I at the time I was in the hospital and I was a little under the weather, and I was probably on some very good drugs at the time. So I was also very sick when this game happened, but it was just fun to watch Pitt win, and it was a distraction from all all the troubles. And that's what sports really is sometimes. It can lift your spirits and distract you from, what's going on in real life for a couple hours. And it really just, like I said in the Pitt traditions, that's why just like whenever they can turn on the cathedral lights of the lights in the cathedral learning in that tradition when they have a big win in football or basketball, that's always just, makes me smile and always like gives me a little bit of, just feeds my soul. And I just remember that because I was in the hospital, and from my room I could see the cathedral, and when I saw the lights on, it was just a special moment for me, and just made me feel a little better. And just, it wasn't, I mean, it really wasn't that memorable of a season. And, it's just kind of like one of those nondescript, Pitt beat a ranked team that they had no business beating again. Well, that's kind of Pitt does that every year for no apparent reason. So, but what are your thoughts on that game there, Tim?
Well, like you said, Steve, that's what's great about sports, right? That that was a big win, and for me personally, you mentioned the Penn State gaffe that had actually happened the week before, where Narduzzi kicked a field goal down by 7 on the 1 yard line.
Was that the same season?
That was the week before.
Yeah.
And so I had sworn off Pitt forever. I mean, I was like, I'm done. I seriously, I was like, I can't do this anymore. This has been my whole life of this team just finding ungodly ways to lose games. And I was at my brother's house, and he was probably even more angry about the Penn State game than I was. And we didn't even watch it. And we decided to turn it on at the end because we kind of looked at our phone, saw the score was close. And so we kind of saw that last drive. And I remember before the Philly special play, we're like, there's no way they're going to convert this. And sure enough, they do. And then, all of a sudden you kind of like make up with Pitt. Right. So that's what I remember. That was my make up with Pitt game. But to your point, about just that is what's great about sports, right? Yes, it gets you angry or heartbroken, but then you have those moments where, maybe something not as fun is happening in your life, and that's a bright spot and a nice memory. And I think that's my favorite thing about your whole list here is just all these nice kind of personal memories, right? And again, that's why we watch sports. It's why we root for our teams, so we can have those memories.
Yeah, and it's why like so many people are into like, the Steelers, or, there's people who live all over the country that are into the Steelers just because, oh, that's my dad's team. And then you get into it, and then you're invested, and then maybe your kids get into it. And it's just great. So thank you for tuning in. Feel free to visit us at pittsburghsportsmemories.weebly.com. I hope you enjoyed our podcast, and we'll see you next time on this.
Bye.